Please welcome Dr. Tracey Flores.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning as we gather from across the country to unmute ourselves and to think about what it means to be in community during this moment, teach and take care of ourselves and each other. And the theme of our conference, as we've heard this morning, is unmute. And this is a real call to action as a way to reclaim our voice, to reclaim our classrooms, to speak out, to fight back, and to protect our communities that are under attack. And so today I am here to share books as a way to do just that, as a way to highlight our language stories, our histories, the loss that has happened historically and currently, the revitalization and the healing that can occur in reclaiming our languages, naming these oppressions, and moving forward to living our full selves and unearthing our silences. Like Abby said, my name is Dr. Tracey Flores. I'm an associate professor at UT Austin, and I'm also the founder of Somos Escritoras, which is a creative space for Latina girls to write, draw, and share stories from their lives and amplify their voices and unearth their stories. And today I'm going to share books with you that center language histories, and center language stories. And to get us started, I really want to bring in voices that help me understand the power of my story, the power of my voice, and the power of books. And this is an intentional shout out to the folks at PBS for the stories, the characters, what they center in their work, ensuring that young people feel seen, heard, that communities have a place to gather. And so I want to make sure that I recognize these characters, these storytellers that have helped me when I was younger know the power of my voice and the power of my story. And now as a mother and as an educator, continue to live in my heart and in my household as I turn to now, Daniel Tiger, Molly of Denali, and Alma's Way to see our stories represented, to learn how to be in the world. And so I just want to shout out these original storytellers in my life and unmute and say that we need to work hard to ensure that we save these storytellers, that we save these programmings for the current generation and generations to come. And so as I was curating books for this session, I really went back to Gloria Anzaldúa and Gloria Anzaldúa's book, Borderlands La Frontera. And this book came to me when I was in college. And when I read this book, it changed my life. It changed my perspective on myself, on my language and my identity. And it gave me words to understand my experiences growing up and my experiences with my language. And in her essay, How to Tame a Wild Tongue, she describes the linguistic oppression, the linguistic terrorism that she endured as a child all the way up throughout her life. And she says, "So if you really want to hurt me, talk badly about my language. Ethnic identity is twin skin to linguistic identity. I am my language. Until I take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself." And so prior to reading Gloria Anzaldúa, I too had experienced linguistic oppression, linguistic terrorism that stems from my mother's story growing up, being shamed and punished in school for speaking Spanish. And then in turn, making that decision to protect me and my sisters by not speaking Spanish to us. Spanish was in my home and my family, and I understood a lot, and speaking is something that I'm still reclaiming and revitalizing for myself and for my daughter. And so when I read Gloria Anzaldúa's words, she gave me language to understand my experience, but also to historicize and help me to see that these oppressions were not just in this present day, that they were part of my schooling experience, part of my mother's schooling experience, and part of what I was seeing, what I had experienced as a classroom teacher, and my role in ensuring that I did not reproduce harmful practices so that students could feel full and whole and fully embrace all of themselves, their identities, their languages, their practices as resources that they bring to their community. And so as a teacher, I was always thinking about language and always curating, as a classroom teacher, always curating books to highlight the power of our languages and also to teach students about these historic aspects of language. And now as a teacher educator, I continue to curate books to support my pre-service teachers. Some have my experience as well with language, to begin to understand the historic legacy of these oppressions that they've experienced, and to begin to name them as a way to heal and reclaim these parts of themselves. So I continue to curate books about language loss, about language history, about language revitalization. And so before I dive into the books that I've curated, which are picture books, YA literature, and middle grades books, as well as some poetry, I also wanted to share some other ways that I think about text, but other ways that I've found healing and opened conversations around our language history and our language stories. And so on this screen, you'll see images from Instagram, from Twitter, from NPR. And I've turned to El Pochcast, which is a podcast of all things Latino, and it's hosted by Rodrigo Nunez. And specifically, back in 2022, there was a 2-part series about Spanish. The first one was You Speak Español, Part 1, Dilo en Inglés, and Part 2 was the No Sabo Kid Group Therapy. And in the second one, he brought together Ricardo Rivero and Marisa Tirado, both writers who talk about their experiences growing up not speaking Spanish and the ways that they've tried to reclaim it for themselves and the ways that they're healing their younger selves and future generations through their writing, their poetry, and learning more about themselves. And then I have tweets from 2019 when Julian Castro was running for president, and he was questioned about his language, and he told his story and talked about the linguistic terrorism that many children like himself had endured in school, and how he is working towards reclaiming that for himself. And in response to that, Denise Froman retweeted it on Twitter and described how we are, shamed for speaking Spanish, shamed for not speaking Spanish, for the way we sound, for being imperfect, shamed by others, shamed by our own, but it doesn't matter because we deserve to exist. And then Selena Gomez and the role she just took on in Emilia Perez, and the backlash she got for her Spanish, and how she worked very hard she was very excited for this role as a way to reclaim and as a way to speak Spanish, and the ways that she was shamed by other actors. And then the No Sabo Kid, and that discourse around not being enough, not feeling enough. And then historically, the NPR piece about the day that a school in Marfa, Texas in the 1950s, they buried Mr. Spanish. All the students were told to write, "I will not speak Spanish" in school on a piece of paper. And they marched out to, outside. They put these slips in a box, and then they buried it, and were told, we're no longer going to speak Spanish. And these women who are now in their 60s and 70s are discussing this day, this moment, and how it felt like a loss, how they had questions, but they kept quiet. And then how years later they were able to unearth Mr. Spanish and cleanse themselves and recognize what was happening that day. And so as I talk about these books, I wanted to bring in these contemporary stories that this continues to be reproduced and replicated. And young people continue to have this internalized feelings about their language and what it means to them based on how society views them, by how they sound, how they look, how they speak. And so in conversation, I want you to keep this in your mind as we talk about the books that I've curated for this session. And so The first book that I wanted to share with you today is one of my all-time favorites, a book that I was introduced to, that was shared with me by a mentor teacher when I was a pre-service teacher, and it's La Mariposa by Francisco Jimenez. And this is a picture book that is based off of his experiences growing up as a migrant child. And it's one of my very favorite books because it was one of the first times that I read a book where this experience was shared about attending school for the first time and not understanding what was going on, new sounds and new landscape, and just looking for a place to belong, but also wanting to be heard and wanting to be seen. And this is his biographical memoir account of his, growing up as a migrant child, going to school, not understanding English, speaking Spanish on the playground with another student, and then the teacher, as soon as she hears, telling him no. And then as the story goes on, the teacher does tap into his artistic abilities, and he draws a beautiful mariposa, and he wins an award for it. And then at the end, you can see his schooling experience start to shift, and also the role that the teacher played in that, but also how students start to open up to him more as he's really trying to belong and trying to understand school and wanting to do well in school. So I wanted to share this as one of those foundational books I like to bring in to talk with students of all ages, with my younger students, really talking about, what's going on? Have you ever had this experience? What does this mean? How do you feel about your language? And similarly with the teacher educators, the pre-service teachers as well, but also that role of the teacher in ensuring that we don't reproduce harm. And then in conversation with La Mariposa by Francisco Jimenez, I also bring in, to think about language, The Upside Down Boy by Juan Felipe Herrera. And I love everything Juan Felipe Herrera. He's a poet, he's a storyteller, he's a former poet laureate. And this is also his experience attending school. And when she felt upside down, this was a new environment, there were new sounds, new languages. He's living in a big city for the first time. And when he's at school, he's trying to figure things out, and he wants to do well and he wants to belong. And he has a teacher who helps him recognize the power of his voice, the poetry of his words. And as he's attending school, he also starts to learn about his parents' experiences and how his mother only went to school till 3rd grade and won an award for spelling, and how his father learned English on the job. And he tells Juan Felipe, each word, each language has its own magic. So in this story, we see how he finds his voice. A teacher supports him in sharing his voice out loud through singing, through poetry, and how it's not about erasing parts of himself. It's about embracing all of what he brings to school. And I wanted to share this because I think these two really speak to each other, and these are good to bring into conversation with each other. And also the power of a teacher to support a child and to embrace all the resources and think about communication more expansively through song, through art, through poetry, many different ways to express yourself, and an entry point into further language development. And now, before I move on to the middle grades books and the young adult literature, I wanted to share also Drawn Together by Min Le. And I was at a conference here in Austin, ILA, when it was here many years ago, maybe 2018. And this book had just come out, and I stood in line. I'd never heard of it before. It just came out, and I read the book and I wept. And I wept because I could relate so deeply to this feeling of loss for not being able to fully express yourself to those that you love. And so this is a story, an intergenerational story. It shows that intergenerational, what can happen when we are silenced or we are made to feel less than, or the many reasons why parents may not pass on language for survival too. That's a real thing. And so at the beginning of the story, the young boy goes to stay with his grandfather. And at first they're not communicating, and they find a way to communicate through art, through their shared love of art, and through their talents. And as they start sketching and as they start understanding each other, they see each other for the first time. And it goes on to show the expansive way they learn how to communicate, that they truly begin to see each other and truly begin to understand each other. And so I love this story because it also involves the relationship between a child and a grandfather, and how special and important that is, and how language can transcend boundaries and perceive barriers in really important ways. And this is a good conversation starter for students to think about their own, experiences with language within their family and experiences that they've had. And I've had many pre-service teachers really connect to this as well, as, sitting with their abuelitas at the table drinking cafecito. And even though they weren't speaking, they were saying so much to each other. And so Drawn Together is another story that I wanted to bring in about language revitalization and healing. To me, this is very healing as they come together through art. I'm going to shift gears right now and bring in some middle grades books. And these days, I am so, so excited for the books with these young characters who are navigating their bicultural, bilingual, biracial identities and showing us expansive ways to communicate and showing us expansive ways to be in the world. And the first book that I want to share is The First Rule of Punk by Celia Perez. And I totally relate and connect to young Malu. And in this book, she is biracial, bicultural, and she doesn't feel like she's enough. She doesn't like cilantro. She likes punk music. She doesn't speak Spanish. And she's called coconut and really hurtful things by a classmate. And she doesn't feel seen by her mother, who she calls the super Mexican. And there's always this choque between them, this clash of her never feeling like she's enough. And then she befriends some students at school, and they create a band and find their own way to express themselves through music, to communicate expansively, and to be proud of their roots in really powerful ways. And this is a good reminder, as Celia Perez and Malu tell us, that the first rule of punk is to always be yourself. And so I like this story to think about her language journey and her language story, and really stepping into her power and finding her voice. And then alongside The First Rule of Punk, recently, Ashley Granillo published a book, Crucita and the Maricheros. And I love this book. And I relate to this as well in thinking about being in Spanish class and being scared to talk and feeling shame because I'm getting a bad grade when I feel like I should do better. She experiences shame in her Spanish class because she's not getting a good grade, and she loses her words. And then during the summer, she's trying to help out at the panaderia that her family has, because since her uncle died, they're having trouble keeping it open. And it's like he's the heart of that space. And she wants to be a pop star, and her family, they're worried about money. And so she's working at the bakery in the summer and the panaderia, and her grandmother gives her a violin and signs her up for mariachi lessons. And in this space, she finds herself, she finds her community, she finds acceptance. She learns about Selena, who also didn't speak Spanish, and how there's many ways to be a pop star, and there's many ways to share great music. And that she's on this journey of healing and self-discovery alongside the youth in her mariachi group who accept her and who love her and who really show her community at the end. And I love this book. These two speak to each other and thinking about communication more broadly, language broadly, but also the ways that music can also help us in recovering these parts of ourselves. And also the story of Selena, which is really important to thinking about how we express ourselves and also how we heal ourselves. And then finally, I have another book, but I want to make sure I talk about this. Speak Up Santiago by Julio Anta. Santiago goes and spends the summer with his grandmother, and he is really trying hard to improve his Spanish. And he has real internalized feelings about how he sounds, how others react to him. And he goes and he's feeling really good about his Spanish and really talking a lot with his grandmother. And he's got friends he makes friends there who embrace him and support him. And then he hears his grandmother and her friends talking, and it hurts his heart. And he feels very hurt because he hears the elders talking about his accent, how it's a shame, how it's a pity, and his grandmother's part of this too. And this is also an important story to really get to the parts of this also happens in our families. It's not just the outside. And Gloria Anzaldúa speaks about that too. It's also within our families and our community. So how can we break this linguistic oppression, this linguistic hierarchy within our own families, but also unpack, where does this come from? There's these ideologies. There's this history too of also harm and hurt that have occurred within our families from schooling and from different times throughout history. And this is a graphic novel, and you can see where I've flagged many different pages to come back to think about the conversations he has and how he finally does speak up for himself and tells people how he's hurt and how he's really trying. And then I have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I talk about this picture book. Spanish is the language of my family, and I wanted to end with this one because I think that this ties all of these books together and really truly historicizes the experiences that we carry with us that started before we were even born, with our grandparents, with our parents, and now with us, and how we have that power to end this for future generations. And in this story, he learns about what his grandmother endured in school and how she was punished for speaking Spanish and how she was made to feel shamed. And through the spelling bee, these words are weaved in about shame, about pride, and also about healing. And at the very end, these words, triunfante, sanación, amor, really tie it all together about learning about our histories, embracing our stories, unmuting our voices, unearthing our silences, and working towards healing by understanding that these things are not our fault. And we have the power to reclaim these parts of ourselves with caring adults, with peers who embrace us, who love us, within our own families. And across these books, all of these characters, all of these people want to be seen, heard, and understood. They also show us many ways to communicate beyond spoken words. They name the shame and historic linguistic oppression that has been endured and are working towards moving towards healing. They may not say that, but in creating a band, in becoming parts of different communities, this is moving towards that healing. They recognize the power of their voices, and then they lift up their talents. They lift them up, their friends lift them up, and they have teachers and adults in their lives, family who help lift up their talents. And then they also, all of these books highlight the complexity of language and the importance of our voices, about not staying silent, and about ensuring that we are heard. And so I hope that you find books here that can be entry points into conversations about language, conversation about identity, and the importance of our voices in all of this. Because all of these stories also speak about silencing, how we will silence ourselves and censor ourselves because of the way we think we sound or the way we think we should sound. And I encourage you, as young people, as people who work with young people, as literacy scholars and specialists and administrators, to support your students in speaking up and speaking out, and also knowing that you're not alone and that we're all in this together. And finally, I would just like to thank you for being here, and thank you for spending time with us this morning. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And always know the power of your voice, and always know the power of your story, and also the ways that books can be an entry point into reclaiming these parts of ourselves for our students and for each other. Have a really wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flores, for that incredible series of books and unmuting, reclaiming voice. Amazing. So a reminder as we close out this session that we have 2 more sessions coming up. We have physical notebooks as sounding boards, process writing, to think, writing to collaborate with Ellen Keene and Dr. Audra Robb. We also have a session, another book talk session, books that highlight Caribbean creators and characters. Also want to remind you of the TheEdCollab is free, and so we really encourage you to donate to the charities for the day. So head on over to our next sessions, and please don't forget to pay the joy forward.